Okay, get right into it. So here in the building, we have 5 team members that work for NOAA OER. We have myself, the team lead. We have 4 mapping physical scientists / mapping team leads. That is Derek Sowers, Shannon Hoy, and Sam Candio, who is our new hire here. Came to us from the fair weather, and we are very excited to have him on the team. He's been with us for about a month. And we got Sam because Mike got a new job. He's now an ROV expedition manager. But he's still based here at CCOM, but for anybody that really wants to get involved in our ROV cruises, see Mike. Also tech demo cruises, see Mike. Just to let you know, we're gonna be taking turns presenting today too. So the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration is like the NASA for our planet's deep ocean. We operate in combination with NOAA OMAO, the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, America's ship for ocean exploration. That is the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer. It's a former Navy Tiagos ship, so it was designed to actually slow tow a Certos array, so listen for submarines. So they used to run at 3 knots all the time. We run generally 8 to 10 knots. It was recommissioned in 2008 for NOAA. And it is a dedicated platform for ROV and mapping exploration missions. 224 feet long. I believe it's 46 berths and 23 mission berths right now in that neighborhood. It's always like, do we get 22 or do we get 23? It's kind of a trade-off every year. We are one of 3 vessels that do a lot of ocean exploration. Definitely always want to mention those. There is, of course, the Nautilus, which a lot of people in this room are quite familiar with. That is run by OET out of the University of Rhode Island. That is Bob Ballard and Allison Fundis's group, and Nicole Renault. And also some people in the room are very familiar with that ship as well, I will say. And then there's the Schmidt Ocean Institute's Falcor, and there's a lot of overlapping sonar systems between the 3 platforms, which is nice because we share our data with each other if we are operating in the same spheres. On the Okeanos, we have several mapping systems. We have a 30 kilohertz multi-beam. That's a 1/2 degree transmit array and a 1 degree receive array. And this week it is being upgraded to a 304 down in Mississippi. I'm told it's going well. The new topside unit is being hung on the wall in our sonar closet as we speak. And I get smiley faces from the team down there, so I think it's going well. We will be shaking that down this year. We also have several EK60 split beam sonars on board, an 18 kilohertz, a 120, and a 200 kilohertz. And we also recently upgraded our 38 and 70 split beam transducers to EK80s. I will say the 38 has been determined compromised, and so we're replacing that transducer in our dry dock starting in the fall of 2020. So we don't actually operate that one regularly, although we can, because we don't want to put bad data into the National Archives, we don't run it. But if somebody is interested in it being run for situational awareness, we can do that. We also have a Knudsen 3260 sub-bottom sonar operating at around 3.5 kilohertz. And then we have 2 Teledyne ADCPs operating at 38 and 300 kilohertz. We primarily operate those during ROV dives for situational awareness. They will not sync through our synchronization device, so they step on our other sonars. But in general, we try to run everything all the time because we are always exploring. Our EM304 upgrade, we are anticipating, this is what we have been told, we should expect better signal-to-noise ratios with new electronics that were developed and borrowed from the EM 2040s. So anticipating hopefully longer ranges and wider swaths for increased efficiency in deep water mapping operations. And they're reporting, I believe it's twice the amount of soundings per ping, so denser across track data. This does require an upgrade to SIS-5. So that'll be another big shakedown thing for us this year. The jury's out on how that system is performing or how that software is performing. We've heard a lot of scary stories. We have a big field season this year, as you will find out in the upcoming slides. But there are implications for us for file management in terms of file type, size, our processing routines. So if anybody has actually a recent SIS5 output KMOL, we would love to borrow it from you so we can run it through our routines and see how it goes. On the plus side, there is a remote watchstanding module part of SIS5 that we will be playing around with during, probably during transits, long transits, to see if we can run the M302 or 304 from shore, like seamlessly. So that'll be fun. Our sound speed profiling tools are, we have an auto launcher to launch XBTs by pushing a button inside. You can see Shannon here loading XBTs in a rainstorm. Maybe there was lightning and we didn't want to go outside. So this allows autonomy for watchstanders. You don't have to go outside and use a hand launcher to do this. It's produced by AOML down in Miami. And if anybody is interested, they produce them on a regular basis. You just kind of have to get in line and they'll make one for you. We always have hand launchers for XBTs as a backup and also a CTD as a ultimate backup for sound velocity profiles. And then at the sonar head, we have a Rezon SVP70 and a backup thermosalinograph. Those are both, the Rezon SVP is calibrated annually, as is the CTD sensors. And then also on board, we have 2 dedicated deep water ROVs, Deep Discoverer or D2 and Sirius. They are both rated to 6,000 meters. They carry HD cameras, very nice lighting. They are able to sample biology and geology. So we end up, how many sample boxes do we have right now?
4 bio, 2 geo, and 6 chambers in the suction sampler.
Okay, cool. So then, yes, suction sampler, that's relatively new for us. And a temperature probe and also Niskin bottles. The implication for Niskin bottles is eDNA. That is something that our office is interested in doing. If you take a water sample and you didn't actually see a particular organism, but its DNA was in the water sample, they're going to build out from there. Telemapping is something that we have exercised here using the telepresence room upstairs. It allows you to have a geographically diverse team where you can have a team of nimble, skilled, communicative technicians on board following our robust SOPs that we've tested over the last several years for acquiring data and then getting that data to shore. And then we have people onshore, like our interns here a couple of years ago, receiving that data every hour and processing it and making sure that it is high quality. We are covering the box we were supposed to cover. And then it really makes the data transfer to the archives faster. There's no delay. We're looking at data that's hours old onshore. That's raw data. All of our raw data gets to shore, including water column data, which is exciting. So this has been pretty successful. I think we've done 9 cruises like this so far of increasing complexity. So we started out just straight transits, like, okay, one of us isn't going to sail, but we're going to put a contractor who's familiar with the ship on the ship, drive that straight line transit and see how it goes. And that worked out really well. So we're actually doing this with complex surveys now of seamounts and canyons and whatever we're mapping. And the benefit is if you don't have enough people to sail, you don't have to sail. And also people who physically can't sail or have other meetings that they need to, other onshore work, they don't have to sail. Of course, people will always want to sail, and that is okay too. Our mapping principles at OER we are always exploring, like I said, so even during transits collecting data, firing everything that we can that is synchronized. We have robust QA/QC processes that we do offshore and then also onshore. Our mapping leads come back and focus on the data. Their first 3 weeks, all they do, hypothetically, is look at their data and make their mapping data report. This is to enable public access to all of our data and easy to use products. I guess not everybody knows this, but all of the products that we produce are supposed to be usable with freeware. That is part of OER's mission, is to collect all this great data and then don't make it into this super complicated, expensive software only package or software, dependent data product. It's got to be used by freeware. It's a difficult hurdle sometimes, but we do maintain focus on that. Map once, used multiple times. Again, that's the public access aspect for science and managers and educators to be able to find our data in a timely manner. Training the next generation is something that we maintain. We'll discuss our internship program later. I hope you guys are interested. And then, of course, all the mapping that we do is to support the OER NOAA mission of exploring the global seafloor, and also recently, big focus on the US EEZ. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Derek.
Thank you. Okay, so for 2019, I just want to go over some new equipment that we installed and tested this year. As Mimi mentioned, we put 2 new EK80 transceivers on the ship. So these are basically the electronics driving the EK60 or EK80 transducers underneath the ship. So this is the first time that we've had sort of this wideband fishery sonar technology on the ship. As Mimi mentioned, the 38 kilohertz transducer was compromised, so we actually haven't tested that wideband transceiver yet, but we've been running the 70 kilohertz all season long in different scenarios. And part of that was testing to understand how it interfered with our other sonars and how other sonars interfered with that system. So we did have a K-Sync device, which is a synchronization device that Kongsberg makes to, you can either put groups of sonars pinging at different times, or you can put in time offsets and see how they play nicely or not together. So we did a lot of testing with those 2 devices. What you see here is just basically the EK80 running in CW mode, which is continuous wave. So it's basically pinging at one frequency. And then this is the same sort of area once we're running it in frequency modulated mode, which is a wide range of frequencies. And you can just kind of immediately tell like the level of detail that you can resolve and the range resolution is quite a bit different. So we'd love to run it in this mode all the time, but you run into trade-offs with the other sonars. And that's where our testing of synchronization came in. We mentioned the new suction sampler for the ROV. So that's our ability to basically pull fragile organisms out of the water column wherever we go. And that was very successful this year. We also had a replacement of our acoustic Doppler current profiler to look at currents under the ship, mostly at our dive sites. This is just a quick, so during the shakedown cruise, we tested the K-Sync extensively. And this is just to give you a sense of what some of this looks like. So this is actually, these are echograms from the EK80 sonar. So it's a 70 kilohertz frequency. And this is just in running it with different sonars in different modes, you can see different interference patterns. So this is with the multi-beam with running, but with frequency modulated beams and the multi-beam turned off. So as not to interfere. When they're all pinging at the same time at this water depth, they the signal was basically stomped on by the multi-beam. This is how we typically ran it in deeper waters, where we would basically run the EK60 in narrowband mode. So you're not really taking advantage of the wideband capability in this case, but there's no real interference. You can also put a time delay into the software, which pushes the interference into different parts of the water column. So if you're interested in the upper water column in this case, maybe that's an okay trade-off for you. But oftentimes we want to get full water column data. And then if you can group them and get no interference, but you're basically pinging one sonar and then waiting for the return and then pinging the other and taking turns. And so you're going to be losing your ping rate there and your resolution in terms of coverage. So we have a lot more information on this. If you're interested, we can follow up with Shannon. We're going to move now into highlights from this past field season. We'll just do it on a cruise by cruise basis. There's a couple I'll discuss, and there's a bunch that Mike will cover. Shannon wasn't able to be here today, so Mike will cover her cruises. For the shakedown cruise, this is a cruise that Shannon and I coordinated. You can see that we're down in the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see our multi-beam coverage here on the right. A lot of this was really just pure shakedown and testing, calibration, calibrated the EK60s, patch test for the multi-beam. We did a lot of speed noise testing on the multi-beam. We had a new array to make sure that we had tested, a receive array. We did some backscatter calibrations, which we hadn't previously dedicated ship time to doing. So we sent that data off to Kongsberg and basically got calibration files for the multi-beam. And then we had time at the end to basically do a survey off of Florida in a place that had never been mapped with modern multi-beam before. So that was a nice add-on at the end. And here's a little view of what that looked like. So we found this interesting plateau with all these unique little knoll features. And later on at the end of the year, our last season, we were actually able to do a dive, ROV dive on 2 of those features and actually explore what was there. But the big highlight of the shakedown cruise was this unexpected shipwreck discovery. So we had 3 engineering dives on this cruise, the final dive. So the engineers just planned to go down, practice piloting the ROVs, test some new equipment. And we planned this dive site, this little white speck here, by this pretty steep feature. That's what that red indicates. It's just kind of a scarp in the seafloor. And we were going to have them explore that a little bit while they were down there. But while they were down there, they saw this image in the sonar of the ROV, and it looked like the outline of a ship. They went in to investigate. We did have one line of our own multi-beam over this, and this is overlain with backscatter. But you can see there's no real distinct signature of some sort of shipwreck that you would suspect in here. So frankly, we literally stumbled across this thing with an ROV, absolute needle in a haystack kind of discovery. And I just want to show a little clip of that. Is it possible to turn up the volume? Do you know if there's an adjustment?
So we were unable to see this target with May, but we did pick the highest student steps on the dialogue and probably someone on it, but it wasn't the year that we had. This is exploration conference.
The upper portions that they consumed when we were looking at they weren't copper sheets, that copper was there to protect the alter stable line. And by the 18th, pretty much everybody connected to the deep ocean for it.
So the voices you're hearing are basically a team of onshore archaeologists that are narrating our dive as we're discovering this. So we were able to get them all on the phone within about 20 minutes of making the initial discovery, and then broadcasting this video live on the internet with archaeologists from around the US, which is a really cool validation of the telepresence exploration model. I'll stop the video here in the interest of time, but it was a really exciting discovery for us, and totally cool way to start the field season. All right, and I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
I feel like we're passing around the ring of doom here. So our first true expedition this year after the shakedown started in the southeast off the U.S. Coast here. The U.S. southeast coast here, the Blake Plateau, Blake Spur area is pretty notable. If you look at the rest of the U.S. eastern seaboard and even up into the Canadian eastern seaboard, which we were there this year, particularly if you look at the mapping data, high resolution, modern multi-beam mapping data, the U.S. southeast is one of the most poorly mapped areas on the eastern seaboard, probably the poorest mapped area on the eastern seaboard. And there's a couple of different reasons for that, but essentially you have a very large Blake Plateau area, about 700 meters to about 1,000 meters deep. And on the shallow area, you of course have the shallow area places that have been mapped, particularly for nautical charting, and further out to the east, further out into the ocean, you have, of course, extended continental shelf data, which many in the room here were responsible for gathering and archiving and producing. But that left this kind of relatively shallow area here called the Blake Plateau, relatively unmapped. And initially this area was really thought to be soft, sandy, muddy, even very flat. And as we're revealing over the last about 5 years, and including into this year, we're discovering that that is not what this is. In fact, it's home to probably one of the largest deep water coral reefs anywhere in the United States, EEZ, including the Pacific EEZs. So our first leg this year is 1903. That's how we number our cruises. So 2019, this was the third cruise in 2019. We were out there completing some mapping surveys in anticipation of a follow-on ROV cruise. I was the leader on this cruise, and we were able to show, in our bathymetry down here, these little mound features in here, these are all either active or relic Cold War coral mounds. And they grow about, the rate of your fingernail. So something that's about 60 meters tall is probably, thousands to millions probably well into the millions of years old. And here we have these Cold War coral mounds, and this, of course, is something where our office is interested in producing is, where do we see these cold water, deep sponge and coral habitats? Where are they? Are they active? What is their community composed of? On this cruise, Mimi mentioned our internship program earlier, so it's our Explorer and Training program, where we invite recent graduate students, students who are still in graduate school, undergraduate students, early career scientists out to the ship with us, or on shore as mapping watch leads on shore here in the telepresence room over in Chase. And in fact, hopefully everybody recognizes Alyssa, who's sitting over there. So Alyssa and I were out there for a month back in June and July, mapping much of the Southeast. And of course, we also had a NOAA teacher at sea. Marcel actually sailed with us again. Janelle Petrea, Catherine Egan was out there as a Sea Grant NAS fellow. So not only are we producing this data in relatively real time to be revealed by managers on shore to use for further ROV or other deep water exploration purposes, but we're also, again, engaging the next generation of explorers here. After this first leg, we had these are about 700 meters to about 900 meters, give or take. So relatively shallow as far as our operations are concerned. So this was leg 2. So this was the follow-on ROV cruise out of Miami. A couple of highlights here. They mapped about 14,000 square kilometers of seafloor. That's typical for an ROV cruise. Of course, depends on depth, right? Depth is going to take, as well as weather, but it's going to dictate the size of your swath, how much seafloor you can sonify at any single time. This was, Shannon was on this one, as Derek mentioned, she couldn't be with us today, but one of the things they discovered in our water column data for the multi-beam was this presence of what they're called the Bodie Island seeps, which was down over in here. So we can actually see these seeps within our water column sonars, both in the EKs if we run right over them, but really in the multi-beam being a swath sonar, it's very easier to see, especially if they're further out away from the ship. Anyway, upon that discovery, and this is one of the things we're capable of doing, is processing that data overnight, processing that seep data, geopicking that seep data, and then the following day using our remotely operated vehicles to dive on this site. These sites are really exciting, right? Because, in traditional photosynthetic sense, right, almost all the energy comes from the sun, but in this sort of habitat here, where you have what are probably methane bubbles or other effluent coming out of the seafloor, right, you can actually get these chemosynthetic communities. And those are really important because they create hard ground in what is otherwise a pretty muddy world. Things like to settle on hard ground, so you often find associated coral and sponge habitats in addition to the chemosynthetic community. And of course, knowing where these seeps are, there's a lot of work going on at CCOM right now, understanding and quantifying how much material is coming out of these seeps. That's, of course, an important constraint within our carbon budget. We next moved into 1904. So this was our 2019 tech demonstration, which I was on from Norfolk, Virginia to Rhode Island. We actually identified 5 projects, ending up deploying 4 of these projects on this cruise. And this is a sort of a new type of cruise for us. Traditionally, we have mapping cruises, and we have then remotely operated vehicle and mapping cruises. And here what we're doing is taking our ship time and our operations expertise and dedicating those to emerging technologies, technologies that are coming from a laboratory phase to an operational phase, or emerging technologies that are maybe out there in a proprietary or commercial world, but are not widely distributable or accessible by the academic or government community. And so we deployed 4 projects on this one. We have the NOAA Office of Coast Survey out there with their REMA 600 autonomous underwater vehicle. So that's us deploying it right here off of our J-frame. We were out there with the Kraken Robotics there, Mahan towed synthetic aperture system. So we actually have a cooperative research and development agreement with Kraken Robotics, which is a commercial company. But it's one of the things we as government can do is form these what we call CRADAs. And so we give them essentially a resource at ship time. They allow us and use of their systems. We're able to produce quite some stunning images. I'll show in the next slide from that. We also had a Woods Hole out there testing their one-way travel time inverted ultra-short baseline, essentially a system that's passive in one direction. So from a single topside vehicle or ship, you could navigate a fleet of subsea robots, or that's at least the vision. And then we also, with Kraken Robotics, had the Sea-Vision laser imaging scan. I was hoping Jere would be in the room, but essentially you want to think about this as LiDAR on a very small scale, right, where with red and green lasers, you can highlight things down below, whether that's coral, whether that's a shipwreck. but you can then go ahead and quantify these things because you get a high resolution point cloud that's relative onto itself. So for something like coral, if you want to understand a coral at 2,000 meters, how fast does it grow? You need these high resolution standards in order to understand that. Here's an example of the bathymetry data from the head of Hudson Canyon. Using the REMIS, we targeted a known shipwreck here, the USS Murphy, which I'll show in the next slide. But we had three different three different assets for depth collection going at once, and that was the ship's multi-beam sonar. Earlier in the day, we had deployed a REMIS autonomous vehicle, and then we also had the towed cracking catfish behind us as well. So here, and this is one of the things OER is interested in, Mimi's going to talk about in a little bit, but is having these tech demos as a force multiplier, right? Collecting more than one source of bathymetry or data in a single given time. Here are some images from that synthetic aperture sonar. Since we were using synthetic aperture sonar, or SAS, pretty relatively new, has really come to maturity in the last 10 years. I walked down the hall into Dr. Tony Lyon's office and said, hey, Tony, we're going to have a SAS out there. Would you like to come along? And this is, of course, one of the advantages of being at CCOM here, right? You can walk down world-class, first-class knowledge and expertise. So Tony was able to come out with us and did some evaluation of this system. And you can see here, compared to a traditional side scan, I think certainly you could argue these images are far improved. This was actually a shipwreck we, again, stumbled upon on the shelf, which gives, with Derek's shipwreck, gives you an idea of how little we know. And here's the bow of the USS Murphy. That was the sonar target. And then here is a classic Bedford scallop trawl. So somebody lost a few $1,000s getting hung up on the Murphy there. This wreck over here is associated with an oil slick. So is it emitting oil? We don't know, but knowing how this wreck lies may be important for managers down the line. Next was our Canadian Northeast and Canada mapping cruise. So again, this is one of Shannon's cruises. They mapped a very large swath here of what is now publicly available data right outside the Northeast Channel here. So this was the total cruise mapped an area of about 18,000 square kilometers. And she hosted students, some EITs from the US, but as well as a student from Canada as well. Again, leveraging those international relationships. And this was again followed on by another traditional ROV cruise where we took some of that mapping data, leveraged it, and we were able to dive on it. So here you have exploration at different scales, right? Talking about the mapping, thousands and tens of thousands of kilometers, getting down to a very small scale with the ROV, and even smaller when you start talking about eDNA or genetics. So this is a good trick for anybody looking to entertain folks in the middle of your talk when they start falling asleep, but as to play them a cool video with sponges, carnival music. The Bathy compilation you'll see in here is from Jim and Paul. So we use that quite a bit for a lot of planning since it doesn't put our computers on fire. It's fairly low resolution, and then you can get a high resolution. And this was also one of the deepest, densest areas of sponge habitats we have ever discovered, we believe. Oops, sorry.
In the Atlantic.
In the Atlantic. So this is the ECS Bathy compilation.
The diversity that we're seeing in the sponges here is just phenomenal. From endless sponges to glass sponges, a lot of pellet sponges, soft sponges, diluted sponges, caustic down sponges, result base sponges, you've got barrel sponges.
But have you ever seen so many sponges 2,500 meters below sea level, right? We haven't. And this was in the Marine National Monument, which is an important discovery. So an example of what we saw in that.
Was it on a seamount?
It was on a seamount, yes. It was on retriever seamount on the eastern side. Moving on and getting into our last bit of cruises, Derek will take it back.
That's the necklace.
Back to the necklace.
Okay, so this was a cruise that we did primarily on the Blake Plateau. As you can see, we started up all the way up in Rhode Island, transited down along the edge of the continental shelf, and then we spent pretty much all the survey time here and then mapping the boundary between the US EEZ and the Bahamas. So I think probably a lot of you are aware that we have a goal to map the US EEZ by 2030, hopefully. So this was a component. We were trying to really map these boundary areas. We did have a permit to gather data in the Bahamas. So while we have that permit, we figured we better use it to map the boundary. And then we did actually have a contract survey with Fugro, by the way, out in this area and up here as well. We're actually expanding sort of our toolbox of how to get exploratory mapping done, not just by ourselves, but also other partners in even private industry. So we had 22 days at sea. This was a priority area on the Blake Plateau for not just NOAA OER, but also for Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They're interested in the geology there, the US Geological Survey. And the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council is very interested in this area because it's really right adjacent to one of their big coral protection areas. In fact, a lot of that's within the coral protection area already. Some of it's outside. So an open question is the boundary kind of doing its job in protecting the corals that it was set up to do, or are there still extensive corals outside of that? So that's part of what we're helping to, using this data to help inform management. And in fact, we did discover thousands and thousands of mound features, which every time basically that they've been sent an ROV dive onto these features, they've been verified to be coral mounds by and large. And that was actually done during the next cruise, which Mike will talk about. So I did want to highlight that we did have 3 explorers in training. This is sort of our chance to get people out to sea. And you might recognize Lynette Davis from CCOM. She did a fantastic job on this cruise, looking at our data, watch standing, and doing some novel analysis of her own. So that was a really fun trip. And this is a quick highlight of what that area kind of looks like in detail. So you see all this sort of like bumpy features down in here. A lot of these are actually distinct coral mounds. So you can see it's a very complex area. And then you can see sort of this underlying scarpy geology. Really interesting place. Right offshore of the Southeast US. And then this was, I just wanted to share this kind of unique seafloor features that I had never seen, sort of this like these wavy lines in the geology there. And then you get these very interesting sort of like polygon patterns that you can see. And this is, I think this is like a 30-meter resolution grid. So even that level of resolution, you see a lot of very interesting features here. And back to you, Mike.
So this was the follow-on ROV and mapping cruise that followed Derek's mapping cruise down in the Southeast. And as he mentioned, right, as we do more mapping in the Southeast, and we continue to reveal more of these, what we think are coral mounds or these moundy-looking features within the bathymetry, we then have opportunities to dive on some of them. And so here, these were just 2 coral mounds that were mapping data just weeks old. So recently from Derek's cruise, we planned them as a dive because we wanted to try and characterize some of these, and we went down, and these were 60-meter tall mounds, and they were just covered in this scleractinian reef-building hard coral, mostly Lophelia, but of course, plenty of other stuff mixed in there as well. And it's not just the coral we care about, but once you have a 3D structure like coral that's increasing things like rugosity, maybe a buffer to other currents, changing the bottom regime flow, allowing for camouflage or breeding areas, right? We know these coral and sponge habitats, these communities, right, of course, associated with all sorts of increased biodiversity. Also know while we're down there, biodiversity for biodiversity's sake is a wonderful thing. Some of the sponges we were targeting down there were larger connection studies for the entire Atlantic basin. And we were also working with, through our telepresence capabilities, folks down at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute who are doing some work on medical applications of some of these enzymes and proteins in some of these sponges, especially with a particular perspective to finding things like pancreatic and breast cancer. It's not always a lot of work out there. This was a sponge we collected. We called it the dinosaur egg sponge. It was about this big. And unfortunately, when we picked it up, even though we had gloves on, those spicules were essentially like sending fiberglass through your skin, except going in the opposite direction. So we all went to bed that night with kind of holding our hands up because it was a little tricky to difficult to handle. But this sponge had never been seen, or we think had never been seen, out of the Antarctic waters. So a huge range expansion for us and a pretty neat discovery. One of the things Mimi hit on before is we're always exploring. So even when we're transiting between focus survey areas, we have the multi-beam on, we're processing that data. It's all arriving to shore. It gets through a QA/QC check at the end of the cruise. And we mentioned our ADCPs quite a bit. Don't talk about them a whole lot, but when you're operating in the US Southeast, there's this pesky Gulf Stream down there, and turns out it's pretty tough to dive with remotely operated vehicles tethered to the ship in 800 to 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters plus water, however deep you might be. And so one of the things we as coordinators have to make decisions through is, using things like the ADCP on the ship to make operational decisions, thinking about the safety of the vehicles, thinking about, can we launch in these conditions, what will it look like throughout the day. So in addition to our technical mapping expertise, right, we're also actively making these operational decisions based on real time what we're seeing on the ship.
Okay, so that was all of our cruises from the 2019 field season, and they will be discussed in detail in an upcoming oceanography supplement called New Frontiers in Ocean Exploration. There'll be way more detail in there. There's there's copies of the previous 2 years over there. Thank you. If anybody's interested in grabbing one on your way out. The 2019 field season version is anticipated in the spring. I don't have an actual day for that or deadline for that for you guys, but we'll have lots of hard copies placed around the building. And also it's always available as a PDF if you just want to grab that online. I'm going to talk a little bit about other stuff we do within OER. So some more Okeanos stuff, but also other OER mapping work and also national priorities for ocean mapping. So with our EK60s, we have a couple of scientists down in Silver Spring in our office now, Adrian Copeland and Amanda Netburn, thank you. Amanda Netburn, who have really put their expertise and lens onto our EKs. And so they're leading water column exploration for our office. So we had a workshop here in 2017 to get the CCOM community's input on what we should be doing with our EKs. And the outcomes were, we should definitely be calibrating annually and more than that if necessary, if we're in significantly different bodies of water in 1 year. So calibration is key. We actually have a automated calibration gear set up that NOAA Fisheries designed here in the Northeast, and our old ET made us our own version of that. So we are actually able to calibrate all of our EKs using multiple settings, the settings that we anticipate using in a year in just a couple days. So that really has increased our calibration efficiency. It's tricky, but it works. And another outcome of that workshop was to solicit input for water column targets during our expedition planning. So traditionally we were just asking people where should we go on the seafloor. Now we make sure to always ask what is interesting about this particular water column area, what would you like us to do? And then we make sure that our data is getting to NCEI, so the National Archives, in a timely manner with calibration data associated with it so that people will use it for quantitative analysis. And then also working with Carrie Wall-Bell, she generated this plot and is generating these plots of all of the EK data going from all platforms for kind of like a quick snapshot of the EK data in the archive. So here you can see there are 2 seamounts with some really interesting scattering layers between them, and then kind of a group of something near that left-hand seamount. So that was great partnership with CCOM that's still ongoing as a result of that workshop. The water column exploration scientists in Silver Spring are great mentors for students. This has really become a great student opportunity for people who want to work in Washington for a few months. There's 4 there, and they were involved in some water column dives off of the Southeast, the cruises they were just discussing. And here's one of their outputs. So they actually plotted the ROV path, that's the blue line. You can see the ROV moving up through the water column at the end of a dive in a stepped fashion. And they looked at the ROV video data and identified the taxonomic groups of each of the organisms that was seen in the video data, and then overlaid that over the EK deep scattering layer. So it was a quick project. I think this only happened for like, a couple of weeks after the cruise, but they did a lot of interesting work on the data. So that's definitely an area of focus for our office. Definitely want to highlight November 2019, there was a presidential memo that came out called the Memorandum on Ocean Mapping of the US EEZ and the Shoreline and Nearshore of Alaska. So this has put a lot of national focus on seafloor mapping. and continues to do so. Our office all of a sudden is receiving lots of personal notes from Tim Gallaudet, which is phenomenal. He's really interested in our program. He's a huge supporter of our program and NOAA in general, of course. And so the memorandum set forth several objectives, which I have attempted to summarize for you here. The policy is to improve our nation's understanding of vast ocean resources and to advance the economic, security, and environmental interests of the U.S. And it is the policy of the U.S. to support conservation, management, and balanced use of America's oceans by exploring, mapping, and characterizing the U.S. EEZ. This is what OER has been doing for quite some time, so we're very happy to see this in a presidential memo. It established an ocean policy committee at the White House level to develop with NOAA a national strategy to map, explore, and characterize the U.S. EEZ. And it also addresses directly some areas of Alaska that need mapping done. And it also pushes for efficient permitting of mapping, exploration, and characterization activities for federal agencies. So even within NOAA OER, we do a lot of paperwork to actually gain permission to map in US waters, believe it or not. So the hope here is that it will streamline those efforts to increase the pace of ocean mapping. So with Okeanos Explorer, we have so far over the last 11 years mapped 1.9 square kilometers of seafloor around the world through various mapping campaigns, starting with working in Indonesia in 2010, and then working in the Pacific and the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean in the follow-on years. So we are approaching 2 million square kilometers mapped. That will be very exciting. And we are counting this. We actually report these statistics of how much square kilometers of the US EEZ deeper than 200 meters on every cruise. We report that to our colleagues in Silver Spring, and then they in turn report that to Congress on a quarterly basis. This is very exciting. There is a new cooperative institute for ocean exploration that CCOM is a heavy partner of. It's based at the University of Rhode Island, but the other partners are OET, which is also at URI, operating the Nautilus, and then Woods Hole Oceanographic, UNH, and the University of Southern Mississippi. The goal of this OECI, is to facilitate long-term collaborative environment between NOAA and the awardees, where broad-based exploration, research, technology advancement, and education and outreach capabilities can be developed and sustained. The hope is to leave a legacy of new technology and well-trained people behind. The award amount is at least $94 million for the next 5 years from the federal government, which can be renewed based on performance. And I wanted to note URI, the state of Rhode Island, is matching that with their own $3 million. So that's quite a substantial sum. And a bit more on what they have proposed to do. So I believe these were actually defined by the awardees. Larry, if you would like to add anything, please do. Okay, this came right from Margot. So the goals are to involve the broadest possible base of ocean scientists and explorers in the ocean exploration program, to carry out ocean exploration campaigns as determined by OER, develop a family of less expensive mobile ROVs and AUVs and other assets that can be deployed off of vessels of opportunity operating in the global sphere, thus integrating autonomy, increasingly integrating autonomy and really increasing the pace of ocean mapping. So this force multiplier that Mike was referring to earlier, if we can get many assets on fewer ships, we can really increase the pace, especially of high resolution mapping closer to the seafloor. Improve the utility and accessibility of all data and samples collected by exploration campaigns. We're pretty good about sharing our mapping data, but I think in general, sharing other types of data is more difficult, specifically physical samples. So working towards ways of maybe automating that to get it out to the public faster and in usable formats. Another goal is to interact in real time with scientists ashore. So again, the telepresence capabilities in this building, and placing an emphasis on needing fewer people at sea each year and providing access to ocean exploration, broader audiences and more people on shore, and then improving the outreach and training of underrepresented populations, students, and the emerging workforce, which is all of us here. So those are the goals of the OECI. It is very new, just really developed late last year, was awarded late last year. So stay tuned for that. I think we'll see a lot of its effects in this building, which is very exciting. Definitely wanted to say that the JEBCO 2030 program, I know most people in this room are already familiar, but their mission statement is here. It's a collaborative project between the Nippon Foundation and JEBCO, and it aims to bring together all bathy data to produce a definitive map of the world ocean floor by 2030 and make it available to all. So they already do a great job of this. They want to keep adding more and more data, and as they have made this announcement, more data has come in, is my understanding, because it came out of the woodwork. People didn't realize, oh, I have data sitting on my shelf, I should give it to you guys. So I think that really made the global seafloor mapped stat jump from maybe 10 to 15% very quickly, is my understanding, which is fantastic. And we like to think that our rapid data delivery and reporting to the archives, to the NOAA National Archives, which is within 60 to 90 days of the end of all of our cruises, has ensured that our data is getting into Seabed 2030 in a timely manner and will continue to do so, and sets an example for other OER-sponsored projects moving forward. And we also use JEBCO layers as great survey planning tools to make sure we are focusing on unmapped areas. Right?
So looking towards a fully mapped seabed by 2030, and especially since we are a federal government agency mapping the U.S. seabed by 2030, we've talked a lot about today about the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, but of course our office is of course bigger than just a single ship. So we're continuing to engage different assets, different programs, even contracted survey buys in order to help meet that goal. And we, of course, are just one federal agency. One part of that presidential memorandum, part of our office, is we work closely with other federal agencies, so USGS, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, but we also work closely with academic and educational institutions. So it's not just the Okeanos Explorer, that is an asset that we're using to meet this goal. We're engaging other forms of mapping technology. So as Mimi talked about, through the Cooperative Institute, through our own funding, through our FFO projects, we're looking at advancements in technology. So I talked a little bit about, examples from this year, right? Our CRADA with Kraken Robotics deploying the catfish system in order to get towards, characterization of the seafloor, or inventorying what assets, living or non-living, are down there. We're obviously talking about the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, but we're also looking at things like, sail drones, right? So the large sail drone, and Larry, I don't know if you want to comment on this, through CCOM, through some of funding from OER, through other funding resources, right? So they're launching a large, I think 75-foot sail drone, truly autonomous top water mapping vehicle. We're also talking about AUV technology, whether that's deployed from the Okeanos. We just signed a cooperative research and development agreement with Ocean Infinity. So they've probably bought more Hugins than anybody else in the last 5 or so years. So they're very engaged in autonomous vehicles off of a single mothership, having multiple assets in the water at one time. So through our CRADA with them, right, they're looking to learn some things about us through our telepresence capabilities and how we do ship-to-shore, shore-to-ship communications. We're hoping to learn from them some insights on how they really leverage their autonomous assets. And like I said before, interagency collaborations, right? So we're looking at, singular full ocean campaigns with different agencies. We're partnering with different academic and educational groups. We are a true community-driven exploration program. Looking forward to our next fiscal year, which actually started back in October, so we're continuing on through. So as we mentioned, we had some more work in the U.S. Southeast. Looking forward to this spring. The ship's right now in Pascagoula undergoing some repairs. We'll do a mapping shakedown from Key West into San Juan, Puerto Rico, where we'll do the EK60 calibrations, shaking down or getting our EM304 ready and up to speed. We'll have an ROV readiness cruise in and out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, hoping to piggyback some science objectives on that. We'll have a Caribbean mapping cruise, hoping to meet some gaps in mapping data in the southern part of the U.S. Puerto Rican EEZ. And then probably a big meat and chunk of our field season, we're actually going to be spending a full expedition, 3 separate cruises out to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So we'll have a mapping and ROV cruise that'll deal with some of the south of the ridge into the Azores. We'll have a dedicated mapping cruise. Hopefully we throw some additional tech, not throw some, but planning with some additional technology through some of our partner onto that cruise as well. And then we'll have another ROV mapping cruise into St. John's, and then we'll finish up with another dedicated mapping cruise down here. The reason I mention these areas as a community-driven platform, right, we continue to scope these areas, we continue to refine our objectives. We've had participation from CCOM before, whether it's folks joining up in the Exploration Command Center, whether it's us talking to Andy Armstrong here, making sure we're getting the right mapping data, whether it's Dan Dykstra or her group developing ROV targets for us. So for anybody in the room here who wants to get involved, there are multiple levels at which you can get involved. This year, while we were working up in Canada, we stood up a new Exploration Command Center. This used to be how we do things, and there is still a great way for a community of scientists to gather in one room. But based on our improvements in telepresence technology, as long as any of you have an internet feed and a laptop or even a smartphone and a way to call in, you can join these dives or join the ship in real time. And we, of course, use that not just to plan RV dive targets. We, of course, not just use that to plan mapping priorities, which is a large part of what we all do on shore here, but things like whether should we sample that coral or not? Should we go look at that sponge? Are these things a new species? So again, it's bringing that onshore expertise out to the ship. We only sail with 2 senior level scientists. This call for input is now closed, but for folks who are interested in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, areas off of St. John's, US Caribbean, if you have study areas down there, if you have technology projects or you have new ways of data processing that you're looking to, say, experiment with out in the field, those are, again, areas where we'd love to hear from you and collaborate on you. I should mention all of us sit right up on the 2nd floor of CCOM over there, so please come over to CubeLand. And then looking again towards 2020, some internship possibilities.
Thanks. Okay, interest of time, I'm going to be quick too. So our internships are great. You get real offshore experience. You do a lot of data processing. We have 10 opportunities to sail, approximately 10 opportunities to sail, might be a little bit more, in 2020. And this is how many we've had over the years. I thought this was neat to look at. So in total, we've had 133 people participate in 177 opportunities over the last 10 years. They've gone on to careers that I expect most of you might be interested in: hydrography at NOAA, independent hydrographic consulting, biogeography with NOAA. They go to graduate school to further their ocean mapping or geography expertise, or sometimes engineering. And then some have gone on to work with the Navy or academic marine archaeology programs. So please do apply and speak with us about any of our opportunities if you're interested. We are easy to find and hopefully easy to talk to. And we always want to thank many supporters of the program. None of this work would be possible without the awesome crew and officers of the Okeanos Explorer. GFOE, who manages, designs, maintains, pilots the ROVs, and also runs our onboard telepresence gear, as well as manages all of our computers and the onboard network now. We could not do this without them. Of course, NOAA Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, who run the ship. UCAR is how we bring interns and mapping expertise on board. We would not be able to do this without them. CCOM-JHC faculty and staff, always here to hear our questions and help us move forward with our challenges. CNSP is actually who the team here, the OER team, works through. That's our company. Scott France is our science advisor right now. He's a biologist. He's going to be sailing this year, and he provides a lot of guidance for the personnel in our office. And then Charlie Wilkins, our senior survey technician, makes sure all of our equipment is working all the time, basically sole-handedly. That's it. Thank you guys for listening.
If you have to leave, feel free to leave, but we'll take some questions.
Can you talk about your experience with the Kraken and what that was like and how long it took to produce images and what kind of swath width you got and what the resolution was of those cells, all that kind of stuff?
Yes, and I can also say having Tony out there was a huge advantage because I know he's put together a informal report, which I've had a chance to review this week, and I agree with a lot of his conclusions. So it was through Kraken Robotics. We also had the Thayer Mahan personnel out there. They're actually transitioning the system over, probably completed by now, but I think what they see themselves as not as a producer of the system itself, but as a data service level provider or contractor. So I know they're interested in getting even some day rates for them. I would say it was extremely positive experience. The fish itself has some smart fins on the back that you can actually control. You know, with synthetic aperture sonar, it's very important to know your system relative to the seafloor, as well as your pitch, attitude, heave. The images would come in almost real time. In fact, we had the Thayer Mahan group at their headquarters in Connecticut, Groton, Connecticut, actually drive the smart towfish as it was being towed off the Okeanos while we were about 60 nautical miles off of Long Island. So those images were coming in real time to the ship, and then we were able to ship those right on shore, and they were driving it on shore, and you can see that acquisition in real time. Those images I showed before, they did come with some post-processing, but they were developed the evening right after. So it was a very positive experience. We also had Dr. Rod Mather out there from the University of Rhode Island as an archaeologist. And so I had him out there and said, okay, Rod, compared to what you see in traditional types of either side scan or other sonars, like, how do you like this? And he was like a kid in a candy shop. He was thrilled. He said, you know, having this type of high resolution imagery, right? This means you don't have to physically go see the site. You can start doing some true archaeological, you know, scans and understanding just from this data alone. So it was a very positive experience. We look forward to future collaborations with them. Yeah.
Any other questions?
My question to Derek, do you mind shed some lights on the K-Sync device that you just showed us in terms of how many devices can be connected, and is there any frequency range restriction, speed of survey? How does that affect the resolution of the data and the speed of the survey? And
it really depends on what the sonars are and what you're trying to do. But I mean, sort of the answer is it can accommodate as many sonars as you want to run, but there's just going to be trade-offs. Usually, if their frequencies overlap enough to interfere with each other, then you're either going to have to you know, ping one and wait for the return and then ping the other one. So you can put them in different groups, and that works really well. But then the trade-off is as you're moving along and you're slowing down your ping rate, then you're losing sort of that along track ping density.
Any kind of depth, any depth range?
What we've found is, like, for our particular operating circumstances, if we were less than about 900 meters for the suite of sonars we were trying to run, we could pretty much just ping them all at the same time, and it worked really well. When we started going deeper than that, that's where we had the multi-beam sort of switching into the outer beams would go into frequency modulated mode, and they tend to interfere with the 70 kilohertz EK sonar. So there's not really, it's very specific to what type of sonars you're trying to synchronize with each other, and then what type of trade-offs you're willing to accept, or, you know, what data sets you prioritize. Like, we thought if we're in an area that's well mapped with a multi-beam, then maybe we don't really, that's not our priority, and we'll just get the highest quality EK 80 data we can and run that in the FM mode. But I'd say the K-Sync performed well in terms of, like, giving you the control and flexibility that you might want. And it's very intuitive. Like, you can see actually when one sonar is pinging and then it's waiting for the trigger from the next one. So you can kind of see in different circumstances, different water depths, like what sonar is waiting for which other sonar, and kind of modify your plan from there. But we can talk about it a lot more, and Shannon has a whole separate presentation about that. Yeah, sure.
I just wondered, with the technology kind of program, whether there's been anything in the non-delaying underway sampling apart from the acoustics, just for the water column, like whether there's for plankton sampling, water column sampling of microplastics, and anything that you can see doing during mapping that might add to kind of the programs?
So in the past, the fairly distant past, I think in 2011, when we were returning from Indonesia back to the mainland US, we towed a continuous plankton recorder, it's like kind of the size of a microwave, and you tow it behind the ship near the surface, and it has a little thruster on it that as that spins as it's going through the water, it makes this paper, like the silk, go through and it rolls up. So we have done that in the past, and that was done in combination with bongo tows, so the CPR, the continuous plankton recorder, did not have any impact on transit time other than stopping every week to let the technician put in a new silk roll. The bongo tows did mean we had to stop, deploy those, and they only go over for like 10 minutes at a time. And that was done for plankton and plastic. But again, that was 9 years ago. I don't know if there's anything in the works for that right now. No.
No, one of the things we're continued and interested in, as Mimi mentioned, is eDNA. So we have another division in our office led by Catherine Egan, who, as the image you saw earlier, who's looking at eDNA. We're looking at the potential of putting some flow-through samplers on during October 2020, which will be our next, tentatively next tech demo cruise. So we're still looking into that. I think as we develop these tech demo projects, as far as prioritizing them, things like any genomics, any AUVs, that kind of stuff, artificial intelligence. But as a publicly dedicated program, one of the things we have to think about is when we collect this data, especially if we're thinking about operationalizing this within our own scope of operations, is how do we get this data? Yeah, we can collect it, and that's great. How do we get it to a place where it's publicly discoverable in a non-proprietary format? So those are often data management questions that become headaches for us in the end of that.
I'm just really curious, how do you guys schedule this when you have these discoveries, and how do you allot how much time you spend on the discoveries versus what you've allotted for the whole cruise? That seems pretty
That is a good question. So are you talking about ROV dive discoveries, or?
All of the
Yeah,
above.
okay. Well, I'll speak to mapping and then I'll give it over to Mike. With mapping cruises, we have, our areas that we need to map, but we also have a certain amount of flexibility to, if we're transiting and we found a seamount that was definitely not in the satellite data, we have the latitude in our timing that we've planned for the cruise to do a couple lines over it. Same thing with seeps. If we found seeps in a totally new area, we could turn the ship around and spend an hour there if we need to. So we have some latitude, and that's just naturally because when you plan a cruise, you have weather days built in, and you have maybe the Gulf Stream is going to be really difficult, so we build in time for that. So we always have a little bit of flexibility time, and then our mapping leads, the watch standards will alert them to certain things, and then we have the latitude to make field decisions.
So you can never spend more than a few hours flat.
I mean, it would depend on, if it was like an amazing discovery in an area that has very little data, if we wanted to spend more time, we would consult with shore and say, there's a sacrifice here. Is it okay if we don't get the northwest corner of our mapping area done? And that would be weighed against, are we coming back? Do we have an ROV cruise coming back? Can we take that little chunk out later? So a lot of it would be done in consultation with shore if it was a bigger deal. Do you have like a specific thing in mind? I'm curious.
No, well, especially with the, just some of those discoveries, you would think that sometimes you might want to go over really thoroughly, or some scientists, you have some scientists that would probably love spending a week there, and then you have other scientists that are fine, finish and move on.
Yeah.
Who gets priority, and how do you know?
That comes up in the ROV dives, biology versus geology. Might have some.
Yeah, so this is where I would say, so as an exploration program, right, we're not thesis driven, right? Our goal here is to make discoveries, put those discoveries onto the public realm, so researchers like you all at CCOM can then go say, okay, federal government, I would like some more money because you found this, and we think these other things could also be these same things, or we need to go back here and here's the reason why, right? So we're not, we're an objective driven exploration program, right? I think Mimi hit it right in the head though. One of the things we do out either in the field or what a large part of our job is on shore is defining priorities. Those sometimes change depending on how the political winds blow. They sometimes change, as Mimi said, you know, are we coming back here in a year? Is there going to be a different ocean exploration asset in the region that could, you know, maybe meet those goals? But that's a lot of what we do is kind of ranking those. And as Mimi, I think, you know, I totally agree, right? There will be sacrifices, right? So if we went back to dive on more coral mounds, that means I'm taking away ROV dives from the end of the cruise, but maybe that's the choice we want to do. And so having that telepresence capability where I can send an email out, I'm sure some of you have received those emails, or from either myself, Mimi, or Derek on the ship. They go out to hundreds or even thousands of folks and say, listen, here's what we're looking at. We're going to have a call tomorrow at 4 p.m. If you feel one way or the other, please call in. And we, every day before we do an ROV dive and in planning up to a mapping expedition, we will have community outreach and say, listen, we could go to this seamount, or we can go to this seamount. Scientific community, please weigh in. And we will listen, and that's what will drive largely our decisions. Sometimes if there are internal OER objectives, that changes a little bit, or if there are particularly objectives with a regional partner that we have a strong connection with, or they're scientifically actionable. For example, just this week, we're talking about, you know, I said we're going to be going to Puerto Rico, right? Puerto Rico, the south side of Puerto Rico has been experiencing some pretty bad earthquakes, some pretty high magnitude earthquakes. Well, we're an asset that's going to be in that region in the next few months. We had a mapping area down there, so one of the active conversations we're having as an office is, should we go stick to our original mapping priority, or should we spend some time as an asset in the region that has a sub-bottom profiler as well as a multi-beam? Should we be going and maybe doing some earthquake response, you know, mapping of those faults? So those are conversations. That's a large part of what we do on shore here. Sure. Alyssa, how was the internship?
It was great. I would recommend applying for sure. So I got to spend 3 whole weeks with Mike.
It will not have to be with me. It could be with Derek or Mimi.